Well, good evening. We are feeding back today on some writing to analyze. I've got 10 texts from my advanced English group, and the analytical task is writing an email about a rather retro subject, namely DVD rentals. Now, this is not exactly modern and up to date, but this does give us the advantage that we know what happened to DVD rentals and companies like Blockbuster, that kind of thing. So we have this kind of like future perspective that might help us do our analysis. I've got 10 texts that my students have submitted, and I've already read them. I like them a lot, and I've already made some markings. Stuff that I've highlighted red is a bit critical, some grammar problems. Stuff that I've highlighted yellow is more idiomatic problems. Maybe it's okay, but it could be smoother. And then stuff in green is like good highlighting. That's stuff that's really great, showing some good examples of analytical writing or generally high-level communicative competence. Let's take a look at the task before we jump into the texts. Here it is. So if you're in my class, you will have seen this already. We have an email that we're reacting to. It says, "Hi, Sally, good news." And we learned there that Alex, the CEO of Video Planet, is looking to organize a meeting with the board and try and take some action to halt the sliding sales that have been plaguing the company. Fair enough. He has asked you, Sally, to speak to your team, look at some data, and email him back with some suggestions. And this is where the analysis comes in. So you've got a range of data here. Some of it is quantitative. We've got a table of figures here, and we've got a graph. And some of it is qualitative, so sort of the opinions and the more human end of the data scale. If we look first of all at this graph here, you see our average DVD rentals are going down rather precipitously. There's been a bit of a leveling off here at the end. And if we look, we might see that is something to do with last summer's price cut. Okay, so there's a price cut on DVD rentals. That has stopped the slide, but I think we all know that DVD rental is a dying industry. We are pretty stable in the game rental area, though. This is game rentals. All right, fair enough. So if the board is thinking that, well, maybe we don't have to do anything because we've stopped the slide, well, that's not going to be enough. Now, here we have like loads and loads of different figures. Now, the art of analysis is really to go in there and decide what is important. We don't really need to summarize all of these figures. That's just going to confuse our reader. There is one trend here which actually sticks out if you look carefully. We have paid downloads on iTunes. Remember, this is a few years ago where iTunes paid downloads was a very new thing on the internet. And we have a tripling from 2 to 6.1 from the first quarter to the fourth quarter of 2008, that is presumably, or the 2008 to 2009 year. Now, within all those figures, that one little transformation from 2 to 6 may not seem much, but if you look at the other figures, this one is increasing slowly, this one is decreasing, kind of medium pace, this is decreasing slowly, this is increasing slowly. This figure is actually massive. That is a disproportionately big deal, even though it's hidden in that table. So paid downloads is going to be a problem here. So that's the quantitative data. Fair enough. I'm obviously just jumping straight into the key bits here. You're going to take some more time doing this when you do this task. If we look at the qualitative data, now it's always tricky. The comments from our team, tempting, isn't it, to believe, well, you know, they must know what they're talking about. The qualitative data is seductively easy to understand. You just read it. You don't have to interpret it. You don't have to go into data and graphs. The problem is that it's often quite subjective qualitative data. And this is the case here. We see the first comment. Obviously, the main problem is internet piracy. Well, yeah, maybe that's the main problem, but I'm not quite sure about that. If we look at internet piracy, that's not reflected in our table. Although free download BitTorrent, that kind of would be internet piracy. And free download BitTorrent is not particularly increasing. But paid download, so not internet piracy, legal download, is increasing massively. So I'm not sure that our first member of staff really knows what he or she is talking about. Nevertheless, it's probably an issue. What else do we have here? We've got this idea of establishing our own download rental service. That should straight away ring bells, because we see download seems to be a big deal here with iTunes. But apparently it's too expensive. Then we have this idea of a merger with Blockbuster might be the only way to save us. Now, it's buried there in the middle of those comments, but I've put it there in the hope that you will find it, because it seems to me that if we think back a few years, the future of providing films to people in their homes did become making them available online. Netflix is around the corner, Amazon Prime, all the services we use today. So if Video Planet is to stand any kind of chance of surviving, it is going to have to move online. And the investment involved in doing that would be a lot easier to manage if it partnered up with Blockbuster. Now, I've tried to make this even more tempting by saying Blockbuster did try this, but it wasn't successful. The idea being that they do have some experience in this area, and you can sweeten the deal with Blockbuster because Video Planet also offers games, and not just games, but games that bring in pretty steady income, right? So there is definitely the makings of a deal here, a synergistic deal where Video Planet provides the game know-how and income, and Blockbuster can provide some level of experience in creating a download service. That would be an interesting idea. It is, though, quite a radical idea, partnering up with your main rival. So I would expect you in your analysis to maybe recognize that fact that it's a rather drastic solution, but that this is a rather serious problem that demands a fairly drastic solution. So that's what we're thinking about writing. I want to take one more quick look at the guidance sheet for analytical writing that I put on your Moodle course as well. So that is this one here. Your audience has superficial knowledge, but lacks deeper knowledge. So that's what we're focusing on. We don't need to explain the basic stuff. They know that, but you need to go deeper. Now, the content, we're talking about identifying and describing these hidden factors, these underlying trends, maybe making suggestions. So we want to avoid getting too long. We don't want to include every single detail, highly selective. So then we have this idea of causal relationships. We have this idea of conflict between qualitative and quantitative data. And maybe we have our audience is used to conventional thinking and needs to be broken out of that. Now, I think that this conventional thinking certainly applies here. It could be our audience, the intended reader, needs to be confronted with some uncomfortable truths. And I think that there could be some causal relationship problems. Possibly there's a belief that just by cutting prices, as has been done in the past at Video Planet, they can price cut their way out of this situation, believing that their prices are the problem and not seeing the true problem, which is a complete paradigm shift in the industry that they're working in. So that's the content and the audience. Remember, it's PCAF, purpose, content, audience, form. Purpose is to analyze. The audience in this case is the boss, the CEO of the company. Content we've talked about. What about the form, how you write it? Well, form always encompasses two main elements, structure and language. In analytical writing, I think that you can be pretty explicit in your structuring. So every good text is structured. Also, something like a novel or a poem is structured. It's just structured in an implicit way rather than an explicit way. So when you write a love letter, you don't normally include bullet points, but when you write a report, you do include bullet points. Doesn't mean that love letters aren't structured. They are, but the structure is implicit in the language. We need to be using explicit structuring. So I am all here for the bullet points, maybe numbered points, maybe underlining, maybe bold headings, that kind of stuff. You can take it too far, so it becomes unreadably difficult. But I think using some kind of explicit structuring, some kind of text level formatting could be a good idea. In terms of the language side of form, we've got to keep things neutral, purely because we're really going for clarity here. And this is a necessarily complex level of content. We're not explaining something simple. We're not trying to persuade somebody of something that they already factually understand but don't believe in. So there's no real need to generate massive emotional resonance with our reader in this case. And that might introduce a level of subjectivity that could compromise actually the power of our analysis. So it makes sense to keep things neutral. We should, though, be careful to be too 100% certain in our statements. The nature of analysis is that you are being given a set of incomplete data and asked to draw informed conclusions about that. you're being expected to make educated guesses, essentially. If you refuse to do that, then you're not analyzing, you're just describing a trend. You need to speculate on what the trend could mean and what the actions could be related to that interpretation of the trend. But in order to clearly differentiate between when you're identifying a trend and when you're speculating on what the implications of that trend could be, you've got to use hedging, okay? Hedging language. This differentiates the fact from the speculation so that you can include both. Adjectives like probably, possibly, likely, significantly, verbs like seem, might, and suggest. So that's what we're looking for in the text, and that's what we're going to dive into now. So let's share the texts on screen and take a look. Now, remember, the red highlights are problems with the texts. Yellow stuff is stuff that's maybe questionable, maybe more idiomatically problematic, and green stuff is good for various different reasons. Okay, text number 1. So the author says, dear Mr. Martin, different name here, doesn't matter. I think reacting urgently is the right way of thinking, which is a bold intro. I think that in this rather brief text, we could think about including a little more detail in the intro, because there's a lot of presumption in what it means to act urgently or to react urgently. It would be a good idea to maybe set the tone a little bit more carefully by justifying what urgent action would be and why we should use it. I mean, I agree, though, urgent action is necessary. But on the other hand, that does come in the next paragraph here. We have a reference to the weekly rental figures per store, and we see that movie rental per store per week is decreasing, even though there was a price cut in the summer. I think the market is probably changing. So this is the justification for the urgent way of thinking, which is fair enough. Now, we do have some tense issues here. If we're talking about something that is happening now, then we need is still decreasing, not still decreases. And if we have a price cut last summer, then we have precise time information. When we're talking in past tense English with precise time information, like last year, in August, in 2015, then we need the past simple tense. If there has been would be the present perfect tense. So even if there was a price cut last summer, okay, that's how it needs to be. Okay, we continue then. We have some spurious capitalizations in this text. So game rental, that doesn't need to be capitalized. This is something we see throughout the texts. In English, you only capitalize proper nouns. Proper nouns are names, essentially, and days of the week for some reason. Names like city names, company names, product names, unless they're very, very generic, days of the week. Otherwise, everything gets written in small letters. If in doubt, do not capitalize. So game rental here, or later on free downloads, there's no need for this to be capitalized, but BitTorrent should be capitalized because it's the name of a service. So what I like about this text is the consistent use of hedging. Maybe the best first aid would be to restructure the company. We could do something here which might not be necessary for our situation, and some structural language, some structural clues. To conclude, I think mainly, etc., etc. The content is also on point. What we need, though, to improve it is simply more detail. So we have to share our products in online markets like iTunes here, absolutely. Maybe stream or something like that. Of course, in an analytical text, we need to add that detail. It's not enough to say something like that. We actually need to specify what we mean, what the alternatives might be, and then what the potential implications of each of those alternatives would be. But this is a question of just adding depth and adding more content to create a greater scope. The structure of the text and the fundamental approach of the text are both completely correct. What we need to focus on here is some tense work, cutting out these unnecessary capitalizations, and then ultimately simply adding a deeper level of content, more detail, and we'll be well on the way to producing some solid analysis. So thanks very much for that first upload. Text number 2, we continue. This one's slightly longer, and straight away, It creates a positive feeling in my English teacher brain. I see we have some explicit formatting here. We've got DVD rentals, number 1, and game rental, number 2. Now, this means that if I'm the boss and this email is intended for me, I could look at it on my phone and I would be like on my way to the next meeting. But in one glance, I instantly see there seems to be 2 key areas of this: 1 DVD, 2 game rental. I don't even have to read it. So what the author is doing here is offering the reader multiple levels of entry into the text, which I think is a good thing for this reader. This is what they want. In a novel, you wouldn't want this. You'd want to read it, and you wouldn't want spoilers and underlining who the killer is or something, right? In a whodunit. But this is analysis. So always the purpose should be guiding our decisions regarding form. I'm glad to hear the board is open for new ideas. This is the kind of intro I was talking about in text number 1. It's indicating that, number 1, you've read the mail carefully because that was stated in the mail that you got, and it justifies some need for action. According to the latest data, the time to act has come. And then we get, after analyses, long discussions, and deliberations with the team. So we get a nice group of 3, different verbs there. Sort of repeats the same idea 3 times, but it adds a rhetorical flourish, which, although I wouldn't say is typical for analysis, in terms of showing that you care what's going on in the company and you and your team have worked on this, I think this is quite nice. The intro sort of sets up a nice idea, which I think would kind of put the mind of the reader at ease. So I think this is really nice. Then we've got some structural meta language. First, we need to look at DVD and video game rental individually. We're talking here about strategic communicative competence. If you remember the 4 different ones: linguistic, socio-linguistic, discourse, and strategic competence. Strategic competence means putting in place strategies to make sure communication happens. If you know that you're going to talk about a lot of different topics in your email, why not set up a structure with your reader so your reader doesn't get lost? I think this is some really good stuff here. Let's take a look at these paragraphs. We've got some lovely vocab: an upswing in the download market, upturn, upswing. Why not use a slightly more unusual word rather than just saying like an increase? And there's additional benefits being added in the argument as well. You could have ended this paragraph here after platform, but I think taking that extra step to add an additional benefit adds weight to your argument. Yes, we are not really trying to argue here. We're trying to analyze. So we're not trying to sort of force somebody to believe what we believe, but a full analysis of the options involves listing the benefits and drawbacks of each one. So adding additional benefits here, I think, strengthens the argument. It doesn't make it too subjective, and it does provide useful extra detail. Bit of a grammar, well, a punctuation point here. Now, the author had used commas here around internet piracy. I'm suggesting those commas could be replaced by these dashes because we already have a comma at the start of the sentence. So as soon as you have more than 2 commas in a sentence, and there would be 3 in this one, that's never a good idea in English. Sometimes with longer sentences, it can be necessary, but if you need to insert a subordinate clause like this, internet piracy, then consider using these hyphens to delineate it off from the rest of the sentence. Makes it easier to read, but this one at the start, this however comma, that's completely correctly placed. We have some more vocab. Compensation in the prospective margin is possible. Profit margin we're talking about here. Business vocab is appropriate here. We're talking about an audience that understands business vocab. It's the boss of the company. So this makes the content clear and suits the intended author, sorry, the intended reader. Game rental, we have the second part, delivering on the structure set out here. And this is also very well expressed. I'm not sure about a couple of bits here. My plan for the company's action is well known. I think you mean it's clear, or it's self-evident, maybe something like that. If it's well known throughout the company, then possibly you should have told the boss about it, right? It's not great that he's learning about that via an email now. And do you want to revitalize our account? I think you mean our standing or our business model. Account is a specific thing you'd have with a customer or a bank. Okay. We have some nice vocab at the end. Far from being saturated. If a market is saturated, then you can't sell anything to it anymore. Everyone's got the thing you're selling. And then we've got a metaphor at the end. The current data implies that DVD rentals can't keep the company afloat. So the company is not really floating. It's not a shipping company. What we have there is a metaphor. And although we are in analytical country, I think there's never a bad idea to use a subtle metaphor to add life and vibrancy to the language. So I think this is overall just a very solid text with some nice vocab flourishes, some nice specific business vocab, some clear structure, and some attractive use of metaphors at the end. Really great job. Thanks very much for that submission. We will move now down to Simon, who has written us a mail. So let's once again look at it. I see more use of formatting here. Straight away, my eye flies to main problem and then internet piracy. And I see we have two sort of dashes here delineating two separate points. So I like the look of this. It looks to me that there's going to be a sort of an analytical section here. Then we're going to move on to more of a suggestions or proposals for ideas in the second half. So that looks pretty cool. One thing to start with: emails in English and letters always begin with a capital letter, even though it comes right after a comma. I know it doesn't make sense, and in German, of course, you have a small letter. They would start with a small g. But we try and remember we start with a capital letter. I know it makes no sense. Look at all the great vocab in Simon's text here. Seize possible opportunities, right? Not just find, not just use, not just discover, but seize. Super energetic, good energy in the text. To begin with the positive results of the analysis you asked me to carry out. Yes, why not start with the positive results? I think it shows awareness that later on in the email, we're going to have some rather challenging content. And I think this is going to do well with your reader. We've got contractions here, but I think these are fine nowadays in emails. Some people will say you're not allowed to use don't, you have to write do not. I would say that, again, look at the context, look at the reader. In this case, your boss is not going to care whether you write do not or don't. He needs to get the information as clearly as possible into his brain. So I think this works great. We have a bit of an apostrophe issue. The apostrophe was after the S here and needs to be before the S, last year's time period. And we have another tense issue. Once again, we have last year's period. So because we have the precise time information, we know when it happened. We need to take not the present perfect, which would be have fallen, but we need to take fell, dritte Form. I'm doing this for German students. So fall is a strong verb, fall, fell, fallen. So not the dritte Form, zweiter. We need to take the fell. So that's the past form. Fell by half. And I like this use of more than tripled. The actual figures went from 2 to 6.1, I think. And you could write from 2 to 6.1 films watched per week or whatever. But it's much clearer and absolutely adequate here to simply write more than tripled. Totally works. You're using a sensible simplification to demonstrate that, to communicate to the reader what's happening without unnecessarily cluttering up your email with lots of detail it doesn't need. So emergency meeting with staff showed 2 prior problems. Prior, I think maybe we want pre-existing problems or principal problems. I'm not sure. Prior doesn't quite work there, but let's not worry about that. First and second, so we're using more of the structural language to keep things clear. Legal alternatives are the main problem. I agree. So you did not fall into the trap of just listening to the comment of that first person on the sheet. You actually said that the paid downloads are the main problem. This is a very well argued paragraph. Keep our standing. That's some nice vocab. Hasn't taken off yet. So there was a F missing from off. Take off, not take of. And we have the word yet. Now, yet is a signal word for the present perfect. So annoyingly, the tense that you did use here is what actually you need here. But you said took, which is the past simple, rather than hasn't taken off yet. Has not taken off yet. The has not, it was correct. This was right, this bit here. But the taken was wrong. English tenses, man, they're a bit of a nightmare. Second problem, we've got a spurious capital here. We don't need a capital P on problem. It's just simply a word. Second problem is the slightly increased internet piracy. I agree here. The argument is that this is not really the problem of the company to tackle. It's the government, and I make sense. There's a sensible proposal here. I think this will be a good example, a good chance to add an additional benefit, like we saw in the previous text. Adding one additional benefit at the end. This would be good here, just to talk about an additional sort of justification for running this campaign. But it's fine. We have then a nice conditional sentence just to round this off. If you need any, just let me know. Conditional one used with the imperative in the second half. It's a positive end to the email. This is a good length. This is a good balance of depth and breadth. And there's some nice dynamic vocab on display here as well, and nicely structured. So great job, Simon. Thank you very much for uploading that text. We continue then with Neville's text. And let's take a look at this one. So once again, we've all got to be aware of these unnecessary capitalizations. Email, video rentals, quality here, video rental. None of these words need to be capitalized. Video planet should be, because once again, it is a name. Now, this has never happened before, Neville, so massive props to you. A bootless errand. You're talking about solely focusing on reviving video rentals, and you call it a bootless errand. I was like, that sounds so convincing, but I've never heard it. I looked it up, and it is indeed an idiom that is used. You might say a lost cause would be another way of saying it, or you could even say a wild goose chase, right? That's what you say if something is completely pointless. I've never heard a bootless errand, but it is absolutely an idiom, and now I've learned it as well. So thank you very much for teaching your English teacher how to speak English. All evidence points to demand in video rentals decreasing. I like the way you've phrased that. Evidence points to this happening. It's just a nice variation rather than always saying indicate, always saying shows. Why not say points to? Really nicely done. Generally speaking, the tone and idiomatic kind of feel of Neville's text here is very nice. Now, Neville hasn't used lots of like explicit structuring, but I don't think that's bad, because what he does have is intuitively structured paragraphs. So you read it and the whole text just flows. There's an intuitive sequence of the ideas. You can doing that means you don't necessarily need to use the bullet points. On the other hand, it does mean the reader has to read the whole text from start to finish in order to get all the information. Can't just jump into like a bullet pointed or a heading or something like that. So back and forth. I think in a relatively brief email like this, it wouldn't really be necessary. We've got some more great vocab towards the end. To go out on a limb is another metaphor. I'm not quite sure where it comes, but it means to sort of go out on the extra mile, to take a bit of a risk, go out on a limb and say Blockbuster Video is hurting. It's some great speculation, and Neville clearly indicates that it is speculation rather than, in fact, we don't know that Blockbuster is also having problems, but it's a reasonable assumption, and he's going to go out on a limb and say it. So that indicates to the reader, this is just my opinion, but it's an opinion worth listening to. May prove to be mutually beneficial. Great phrasing. Sounds very nice. I've just tidied up this part. There's a bit of confusion in the word order here. And I think in this use of the word compensate, normally you compensate for something. So you need compensate plus for. If you want to use it like the German Kompensieren, then you need to say offset. So you can offset decreasing demand by increasing alternative sources of revenue. It means basically balance out, offset, or compensate for decreasing demand. So although the email is relatively brief, it does hone in on the correct points, and You really can't fault the style. It feels very natural, very easy to read, and you can also read it in one go, and it just kind of happens very quickly. So I enjoyed reading that. Lot to like in there. Thanks very much for submitting that one, Neville. Okay, we reached the halfway point with Jennifer. Text number 5 of the 10 texts I'm going to talk about today. So, as you can see, I do not have much to complain about in this text. I've not found any, two tiny red points and some really nice use of vocab. First of all, we need the capital letter at the beginning, but I'm sure Jennifer won't make that mistake again. I think we have, first of all, some nice structural vocab. Once again, I'd like to give you a quick or concise overview of our current situation. You are telling the reader what's going to happen in the email because you're acknowledging the email is a little bit long and you want to give the reader a chance to prepare their brain to get all the information. It is good strategic competence that you're showing here. I would say a quick or a concise overview, though. That collocates a little bit better than compact, although that you could also say that. So, this is a smart idea. I agree with you that the price may have stopped the slide for now. By acknowledging that the reader knows this, you're also using strategic communicative competence. You're showing that you understand that, so they are not going to think that you think that they don't know and possibly get frustrated and maybe just jump over some parts of your text because they presume you're going to describe something that they know. Do you know? I'm not doing a great job at explaining this myself, but by indicating upfront that you acknowledge their position, you gain their trust and they're more likely to take you seriously. So this is, again, it's subtle, right? But this is the difference between people whose emails get understood and get the job done and seem to bring clarity to a complex situation, and people whose emails just make everything more complicated. And we all know there are people like that, right? And you don't want to be that kind of person. Jennifer is not, because she's putting in place these subtle, structural, strategic measures. So as we continue, we get some good argument here. We get some analysis of the current situation, alarming risk continuing. So this justifies why we need to fundamentally reconsider our past strategies. Now, normally I would complain about single sentence paragraphs. I think that a paragraph should be more than one sentence, but because this is such a fundamentally kind of like a turning point in the email, I think it's justified here. She's not just saying, let's try something new. She's saying, reconsider our past strategies. So that is more than just trying something new. It's like it's reconsidering everything. I think that's the level of like profound change that's required of this company. So let me get some more analysis. This is all very well. This is well argued. We get an additional argument here. Strengthen our marketing tools with billboards, radio advertisements. Good to not build a strategy around this because we know the real problem is the paradigm shift in the industry. But to use it to augment your strategies with this is not a bad idea. This is also a well-written paragraph. Generally, the paragraphing is very strong here. I would just suggest this bit is possibly a little bit clumsy, may not do it in our usual way anymore. Maybe we need to modify our approach, would be just a slightly more elegant way of saying that. If you have chance in an email, you should reserve 10 minutes at the end and just go away, come back to it, reread it and see, is there just not an easier way, a more elegant way I can express certain things? Then we get the best, the high point of this email, which is the option of merging with Blockbuster. There's a question here, a rhetorical question. Now, Jennifer needs to include a question mark at the end of it. And having a full-on rhetorical question in an analytical email might seem to be a little bit too much, but I think it's definitely justified here. We then get some more conditional sentences. If we combine this, there is a good chance, nicely hedged, you're not saying it's definitely going to happen, there's a good chance we can enter the upcoming business market, I would say, rather than division. And then we get like we move now, you're really trying to sell your idea, which I think is good in this case. Since people actually go to the cinema, let's make them feel like they can bring the cinema home in good quality and for a decent price. This sounds just really good. It's quite salesy, quite marketing type for an analytical email, but I think it doesn't take things too far. And you have set out a clear idea first. You're just trying to make the reader understand how that idea could look in a more marketing tone. And I think that's fine. If the whole email were done like this without it being solidly backed up by analysis, that wouldn't be too good, but this is great. Once again, we have some more hedging at the end. We should not wait. So you're always offering sort of levels of your how might you say it? You're not making 100% statements. You're offering should, could, might. That makes this very good. So I really like this. Nice length, good balance of depth and breadth, and some nice shift to a more shifting up the gears to make it more persuasive and a bit more marketing focused at the end. Nice little touch there. So thank you very much, Jennifer. We continue then with another text, which is from Ananda. Now we go for a much more structured approach. You can see we've got 3 points mentioned here, and then we've got these headings mentioned here. As a reader, I can look at it and instantly I see where the key data is. And I can look and I can basically read these 3 sentences, read these 3 headings, and put my phone away. And I've kind of got the gist of it, which is pretty cool for this particular situation. In the intro, once again, we get a nice positive intro, acknowledges the current situation, shows that you've listened, you've read the email, you know what's going to happen. I'd maybe replace bad with problematic, challenging, that should say, not challenged, challenging or tricky situation, just a slightly more euphemistic term. To say bad is a bit bad. Let's just make it problematic. Strong structuring choice here. I think this works well for this purpose. As I've said, we have another metaphor. We have to keep our eye on something. You're not going to put your eye anywhere, but it means you're going to look on something. Why not use these little metaphors, these little idioms? It makes your text sound natural and readable. Once again, we've got the number didn't gain a triple, it's tripled. So triple can be a verb, but it's the right way of expressing it, as we talked about before. We've got just very clear paragraphing here, each one very focused, no issues in terms of accuracy. As I said before, as I said above is the better way of saying that, does not require immediate action would be a better way of saying does not need an immediate act on it. Okay, does not require action, often collocates well with require. Demand, you could also say. Finally, we have a nice final paragraph. This should actually be probably formatted back here, I think. 1 point, we have not a semicolon, but a colon here. Doppelpunkt. Now, if you have a colon, number 1, colons are awesome. You should totally use them. If you have after the colon a verb in the sentence, like we need to establish, that's a verb. That means that the sentence following the colon is indeed a complete sentence and not just a clause. Auf Deutsch, das ist ein Satz und kein Satzteil. If you have that situation, then you need to capitalize after the colon. If you do not have a full sentence afterwards, so there's no verb, then you can leave the letter after the colon small and you don't need to capitalize. But you should survey native speakers and find out how many of them know that. It doesn't really matter too much. What else can I say? This is just a really strongly argued, really quite strongly analytical email. It contains a lot of depth and detail. Despite being very analytical, it doesn't feel too cold in tone. It still feels like you care and like you want the company to succeed. This is achieved by just short sentences here that do a good job, especially at the start and at the end, of bracketing the hardcore analysis and making it feel more human and more concerned. Great text, Ananda. Keep up work like this and you'll fly through this semester. So then let's continue with text number 7. I really like the intro with this. Once again, we acknowledge the board's position. We've seen that several times now. I think this is all really good. We certainly can't keep lowering our prices to accommodate for a changing market. Now, I thought, is that a bit harsh? Does that sound a little bit too much like you're telling the boss what to do? No, I don't think it does, because the situation is precarious for the company now, and it is here an implicit criticism that this lowering of prices cannot go on. And by phrasing it, we can't keep lowering prices. There's a subtle implication that this has been going on for some time, which it has been. I think we have to be careful because we are implicated, right? I mean, we work for this company. Sometimes I get texts for this simulation where people are writing, well, the answer is clearly to do this and this. And you sort of think, well, but you work for the company. If it's so damn obvious, why didn't you say something about it earlier? But I think this um, it sails a little close to the wind, but it absolutely is okay. We certainly can't keep learning. And it nails the fundamental point. You cannot price cut your way out of a fundamentally changing market. So nicely done. We've got some nice structuring here with these points. Once again, these my students, they are far too smart to be distracted by the little red herring I included in the comments. The main problem is paid rentals, not piracy. My team is torn on whether. Nice phrasing. My team is torn. It means they can't decide which way they do. They are zerrissen. Maybe that's where it comes from, but it works in English as well. This is the wrong weather, though. This is the weather that you get outside. We need the weather with an H. It took me many years to remember that and spell it the right way. Nicely paragraphed, nice use of explicit structuring. This also leads to the proposals from my team. Just subtle structural cues. They make your email flow. It makes a difference if you include that stuff. Once again, really efficient use of language. So this submission, it really shines in using very few words to get across a lot of detail. If we just read these 3 lines, it nails the whole thing. The first possibility is to concentrate only on games and leave the move market, which could only work with a massive marketing campaign to try and move our income with games to an acceptable amount. The second one is to try to establish our own download service to compete in this new growing online market. Yeah, sets it all out. Sets out why games would be an option, but would require a lot of stuff. So we're using conditional 2 here. If we did this, we would have to do this. We're moving firmly out of the real and into the theoretical, and consistent use of conditional 2 form does that very well. The second one is to establish our own download service. Now that is conditional 1. If we do this, it's not if we did it, but if we do it. So once again, using conditional 1 makes the second option more realistic. Subtly, the first option remains more theoretically possible, but not really advisable. Subtle language choices mean you can express that whole idea in just 2 sentences. Nicely done. Common theme. Yep, that's a nice way of saying in my team, like a common thread, you might say. Is the automotive blockbuster. There's no surviving in this market without change. I just thought that sounded a very kind of cool and natural way of saying that. There is no plus ing form. That is quite a specific way of using English. I suspect that this person may have spent some time in an English-speaking country to know to say that. Works very well here, though. Surviving is, of course, a metaphorical expression. A company can't really survive literally, but it works here really well. It introduces color into the text. We have more rich metaphors here. Our foot in the door of the gaming market. Furthermore, we could attempt to build an online presence. Nicely hedged there. It wouldn't necessarily work, and you don't want later on somebody to point to your email and said, "You said we could do that." You said, "No. I said we could attempt to do it." Keeps your legal issues in check later on. Then we have, I think here we have had this subtly in other emails, but it's really clear here. Acknowledging the drastic nature of the solution. Yes, we're being analytical. Yes, this isn't about being massively persuasive, but it's worth showing that you understand that the reader is going to find this kind of difficult to swallow. Like, really? Well, by doing that, by showing that you understand, you empathize with the reader situation, you will be more likely, they will take your content more seriously because it will be coming from somebody who acknowledges the stress or the difficulty that they are under. We're going to look later in the semester about the different ways in which we can achieve influence and persuasion. And one of them is showing that you are a knowledgeable and even-minded arbiter of the situation. And acknowledging the reader's position boosts that aspect of your writing. In the last years, in den letzten Jahren, in recent years. Try and remember, in recent years is how we say in den letzten Jahren. All right, we have 3 more texts to go. I wonder if anybody's actually watching this live. I don't think anybody's watching. This is my first live stream. I'm going to admit that now. So if you are watching live, then post something and say hi. I don't think anyone is, but we'll see. I decided to just film this and stream it live rather than filming it and uploading it, because, why not? Okay, Alexandra has done us a text here. This is pretty long, lots of green, no red or barely any red, and I see some nice explicit structuring down the bottom. It's a good text. It's a very good text. I'm just going to pull out a few bits to talk about. First of all, deliberated with my team. Why not say something different than discussed? I've discussed this. I've talked to my team. I've deliberated. If you have a slightly more interesting way of saying it, then you can put it in there. We couldn't arrive at an unambiguous conclusion. Again, more nice vocab. Here's some nice phrasing. We can't ignore the fact that people will always prefer free to paid. It's a good phrasing. It's idiomatic. And it also sort of suggests that maybe this has been happening a little bit in the company. You could, to make it even more critical, you could say, we can't continue to ignore the fact that would really make it like we have been doing this. So you considered that, Alexandra, but then you pulled back from it, which I think was probably a good idea, but it's worth considering, and it is worth mentioning. Is another, because these are just like good phrases that maybe you've read them in emails or you pick them up. It's easily just freighted into your own writing, just makes it sound very natural. There is a combination of reasons for this rather than that. If you just mention something like a concept and then you refer back to it, if it is directly before what you're saying, then you say this. If it is somewhere else in the text, then you say that. It's a very, very vague differentiation, this and that in English, and it often doesn't matter, but it sometimes can be confusing. This always implies proximity to the speaker or the writer, or proximity to the idea in the text. That always describes otherness. So this and that, and I always find myself just using this motion as if that is something grammatically explanatory, but that's really what it is. This is really it's crazy. Anyway, don't worry about it. We get some good detail there. I'm not quite sure about the pronouns in this sentence. I think that you should be saying we, because you are part of the company, right? But I don't know if you mean like you as in one or it, but I think we would be best here. We're missing the word customers here. Otherwise, this is a great paragraph, and it also points out something I've never thought about before. The average movie does last 2 hours, and a game can last weeks to master. So this is a really good point. We get some nice numbered points in this strategy, and we get some like really crazy creative ideas here happening at the bottom. So how about our PR staff romanticize the idea of DVD rental, trying to make it kind of retro and cool, or organize some movie events like a British comedy evening. This is genius. Now this is very, I think that your boss should be proud that he's got such a creatively thinking of a department manager here, because you're not necessarily required to deliver this level of creativity in your analysis, but I'm not complaining. I think this is great. And why not? It's still very clearly structured. They're not unreasonable ideas, and you're not building the whole strategy around it. These are suggestions 3 and 4. You've already put up 2 more mainstream suggestions. So I think this is great. One point here towards the end. Looking forward to meeting you. This is good. When you look forward to following a verb, followed by a verb, you always use the ing form, which a lot of people think this doesn't sound natural. A lot of very good English speakers do not include this. You need to include it, though, in all the subsequent verbs, also one discussing. And meeting you personally, you need a pronoun, you need a adverb there, personally, non-adjective, because you are describing the meeting. Meeting is a verb, meeting somebody personally. You also say, don't take it personally. Lots of people say, oh, don't take it personal. You take things so personal. Fine, but that's not right. Lots of people say it. It's not going to fail you the exam, but it's not right, technically. It's my job, guys. Okay, this is a really great email. Creative thinking, lovely phrasing, good length, good paragraphing, good structuring here. A lot to like in that text from Alexandra. Thank you very much. We've got 2 more to do, guys, and then I'm going to close down this stream. If anyone's still watching, if you're watching the video later, I hope you're enjoying it. Let's see then. Isabel says, hi, Alex. Now, Isabel's text, it's has the feeling more of like a report rather than an email. By saying, "Hi, Alex, our goal will be to make the current more attractive." I think what we need there is a slightly more personable intro into the email. If you can compare your intro here, Isabel, with the other intros we saw, do you see how the other intros kind of created more of a connection to the current situation, and maybe the email itself to sort of guide the reader into it? I think that's missing here a little bit. And maybe also like a bit more specific specific points on who this is, who is the we in this case. I mean, I know it's your team, right? But this is something you can maybe attach this more explicitly to the guy's email. So we've got then some bullet points. We've got strategy 1, and down here we've got strategy 2. Each strategy is followed by 2 bullet points, which I think is good. This is a sort of consistent way of formatting this. I can look at it and pretty clearly I get a sense of the idea. We've got a game rental here, and we've got download and download here. I wonder whether it's even necessary to put this stuff in. Could we not just delete that and have strategy 1, strategy 2? I would suggest maybe we could. So here, there's a couple of slightly confusing points. This one I've done yellow. Games are consistently falling with a slight increase. So consistently falling with a slight increase, there's some kind of contradiction there. So we've got to be careful about proofreading our texts and making sure there's nothing in there that's going to confuse the reader, because I'm not quite sure what this means. You are, of course, right that the video rentals are indeed falling steadily, which is the main point, which is why you put it at the start. On a similar note, this sentence here, the existing offer should be expanded but not cut back on quality. So we're talking here about game rentals, and there's a bit of ambiguity there. What does it mean to cut back on quality? Does it mean we offer more high quality games? Do we offer better service in the way we rent out games? Avoid ambiguity when it comes to analysis. Always think, right, is this a bit too generic, or is it open to misunderstandings? That could be an issue there. Strategy 2, and this is really the main strategy, because we know that strategy 1 probably can't really save the company. So I would argue that this strategy 2 should come first and should be backed up or supported by an additional strategy, just to try and kind of keep it going without being the main thrust of the strategy. Here, though, we've got some really nice content. I've highlighted it here. What Isabella has done here is address more stakeholders than the usual just customers and the company itself. She's talking about government, higher penalties, more global action against piracy. She's taking a slightly broader view, sort of pulling back to the big picture a little bit more. I think it's really good. I also think that this section is really well argued. This is where Isabella is making the case for the merger with Video Planet, but the key term is missing: synergies or synergy effect. That's what we really need to do, and we need to think about that key business vocab that will nail the precise meaning we want to achieve. That's going to be a good thing to use in analytical texts. Nevertheless, this text basically it gets better and better. Bit bumpy at the start, but by the end we are paragraphing beautifully and making well-structured arguments with a wide range of detailed content. So I like, Isabel, thank you very much for uploading. And we arrive then with Christoph and the final text, which I believe Christoph uploaded today. So I was glad we can get through all of them. So, dear Alex, we have a capital letter at the start. This makes me happy. I'm glad that the board is interested in involving new suggestions of our departments. I'm not quite sure of the verb here. Interested in, I think you could probably just take out that and just say interested in the new suggestions of our departments. But it's good to show that you understand the situation with the board and the situation your boss is in. Time is running out, indeed. Yes, I think this injects a sense of urgency that's necessary. And we get this is what Isabel maybe was a little slightly missing from your text, this kind of contextualizing intro, just to get the reader right into the right up to speed with where the writer is at. So strengths, not strengthen. Strengths is the noun, strengthen the verb. Straight away, we begin with weaknesses, strengths, and then possible solutions. It's an interesting structure, but I think it works well. We go straight to the data here. The data is clearly summarized. Christoph does not go into too much detail here, which I think is important, but he does focusing on the key areas. Another slight verb problem, I would suggest rather than I suppose. I think, although I suppose it's not bad. I suppose sounds more like it doesn't imply you've done much deep thinking about something. Like, oh, I suppose we'll go out then, rather than showing what your considered response is here. So maybe suppose is maybe would suggest to be a better choice. This is very well structured. The paragraphs are a nice length, and the headings indicate to the reader exactly what's going on. Part 3, possible solutions. In view of the fact, this is a nice way of introducing a slightly more unusual way of introducing a new idea. In view of the fact that the market for movies is dominated by downloads, we see 2 different possibilities for future strategies. This sounds very analytical, very clear, very good. And this is pretty well argued here. Nevertheless, I think that, yeah, this, and then we have the second strategy, the merge with Blockbuster Video. Here, as with the other text, I would say that the merger needs to be the headline strategy, backed up by the reliance on games. And we ideally, in terms of content, we would want to argue why the Blockbuster thing will work. Namely, we have the synergistic effects of both being in movies. We can offer them the game downloads. They can offer us their experience in setting up an online download system. But a nice, slightly more formal but very polite, kindly appeal to the board to pay attention to our thoughts and suggestions. Nice email. Length is good, scope is good, apart from these details I was just talking about at the end here. Quality is good, accuracy is good. Procuring, just saw that word, like procuring legal copies. Nice vocab. Right, guys, there we have it. That concludes the live stream. If you've been watching along, then thanks very much. Probably you're watching this later. I hope that feedback is useful for you. We've got a lesson tomorrow, so we'll be continuing our journey into advanced English. I look forward to seeing you then. Stay safe and healthy and take care. See you in the next one.